Black Book contained hundreds of names: politicians, royalty, Hollywood stars, business moguls. When FBI agents finally seized it during a raid on a Caribbean island in 2019, they found something that would send shockwaves through the world's most powerful circles. But by then, Jeffrey Epstein had been operating his network for more than 2 decades. The story begins not with his arrest, but with his inexplicable rise. A college dropout who somehow became a financial genius trusted by billionaires. A man with no visible clients who lived in the largest private residence in Manhattan. A person who flew on a private jet nicknamed the Lolita Express with passengers whose names would later make headlines around the globe. The question everyone would eventually ask was simple. How did someone with such a disturbing pattern of behavior operate in plain sight for so long? The answer lies in something more disturbing than the crimes themselves. It lies in a web of silence, complicity, and willful blindness that stretched from police departments to prosecutors' offices, from academic institutions to royal palaces, from corporate boardrooms to private islands. This was not a story of one predator operating in shadows. This was a story of a predator operating in plain sight, protected by the very systems designed to stop him. Epstein's ability to cultivate relationships with the powerful was almost supernatural in its effectiveness. He understood instinctively how to make himself useful, indispensable even, to people who already had everything. He didn't just offer money management, though that was the pretense. He offered access, connections, and aura of exclusivity. His dinner parties in Manhattan brought together Nobel laureates and foreign dignitaries. His island retreats promised privacy and discretion. His private jet offered convenience and, critically, no commercial flight manifests. For the ultra-wealthy and ultra-powerful, Epstein provided something rare, a space where normal rules didn't seem to apply. In 1976, Jeffrey Epstein was teaching calculus and physics at the Dalton School in Manhattan, despite lacking a college degree. The headmaster who hired him was Donald Barr, father of future Attorney General William Barr. Students remembered him as strange, inappropriate. He was asked to leave. But instead of fading into obscurity, Epstein somehow entered the world of high finance. Within years, he was managing money for billionaires, though no one could quite explain how or for whom. His first major connection was Leslie Wexner, founder of Victoria's Secret and the Limited, one of America's wealthiest men. Wexner gave Epstein something extraordinary: power of attorney over his finances. Epstein moved into Wexner's New York mansion, a property worth tens of millions of dollars. He flew on Wexner's private jet. The relationship was so close that people in Wexner's circle assumed Epstein must be managing billions. But documents would later show something puzzling. Wexner appeared to be Epstein's only major client. So where was the money coming from? The mansions multiplied. A palatial estate in Palm Beach, a ranch in New Mexico, an apartment in Paris. And then there was the island, Little St. James, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands that locals would come to call Pedophile Island. Epstein bought it in 1998 for $7.95 million. He built a compound there, complete with a temple-like structure that would later appear in aerial photographs, generating endless speculation about what happened behind those walls. But the most disturbing pattern was already emerging. Young girls, some as young as 14, were being recruited to visit Epstein's properties. They were told they would give massages. They were promised money, sometimes just $200. What happened next would be detailed in hundreds of pages of court documents, victim testimonies, and police reports. The pattern was consistent: recruitment, grooming, abuse, and then critically, many of these victims were allegedly asked to bring other girls. A pyramid scheme of exploitation. The first police investigation began in 2005 when a mother in Palm Beach reported that her 14-year-old daughter had been molested at Epstein's mansion. Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Ryder assigned Detective Joseph Recaray to the case. What Recaray uncovered was staggering. He identified dozens of potential victims. He found a pattern of systematic abuse. He built what he believed was an airtight case. But then something strange happened. The case was taken over by federal prosecutors. The investigation itself revealed disturbing patterns. Recaray interviewed victim after victim, and their stories were horrifyingly consistent. They described being approached at schools, at the mall, at the beach. The pitch was always the same: come give massages to a wealthy man, make some easy money. Some were as young as 13. Most were from troubled backgrounds, vulnerable, easy to manipulate. They described arriving at the mansion, being led upstairs, finding Epstein in various states of undress. What was described as massage quickly became assault, and then came the crucial next step: bring a friend, recruit another girl, make more money. This wasn't opportunistic predation. This was systematic industrial-scale exploitation. Epstein had created a recruitment pipeline, turning victims into recruiters, using their need for money and their desire to help friends as fuel for an ever-expanding network of abuse. Some girls brought dozens of others. The scale was staggering. And all of it happened in a mansion steps away from some of the wealthiest properties in America, with household staff who saw young girls coming and going constantly, with a personal assistant who allegedly scheduled the appointments, with a network of adults who enabled it every step of the way. Detective Recaray wanted to arrest Epstein immediately. Chief Ryder, his supervisor, supported him. They had witness testimony, they had physical evidence, they had a clear pattern. But Epstein's lawyers were already at work. The legal team included Alan Dershowitz, Harvard law professor and appellate specialist. They included Roy Black, one of Florida's most prominent criminal defense attorneys. They included Kenneth Starr, former independent counsel who had investigated President Clinton. The firepower was extraordinary for what should have been a straightforward state prosecution. And then the pressure began. Epstein's attorneys contacted the FBI. They suggested federal jurisdiction. Palm Beach police found their investigation being undermined. Victims were contacted by private investigators. Some were allegedly offered money. Others were threatened. The atmosphere around the case changed. What had been a local investigation of a sex offender became something far more complicated, far more political. Chief Ryder would later describe being stonewalled, his investigation sabotaged. He fought back, but he was a local police chief going up against billionaire money and federal power. The outcome was perhaps inevitable. Alexander Acosta, then U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of pursuing federal charges that could have resulted in a life sentence, Acosta's office negotiated a deal. Epstein would plead guilty to 2 state prostitution charges, serve 13 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail, and register as a sex offender. But the most controversial part was buried in the agreement. A non-prosecution agreement that granted immunity to any potential co-conspirators, named or unnamed. The victims were never told about this deal until after it was signed. It violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Years later, emails would surface showing the negotiations. Epstein's legal team had essentially dictated terms. They argued that federal charges would be too harsh, that Epstein was a first-time offender, that the victims were prostitutes who had been compensated. The language was victim-blaming, offensive, legally questionable, but it worked. Acosta's office agreed to language that protected not just Epstein, but everyone around him. The immunity clause was sweeping, unprecedented. It meant that anyone who had facilitated, participated in, or benefited from Epstein's crimes could never be prosecuted federally for those crimes. The names protected by that clause were never made public, but the implications were clear. Why did Acosta agree? He would later claim he was told to back off, that Epstein belonged to intelligence. He provided no evidence for this claim, and intelligence agencies denied any relationship with Epstein. But something happened behind closed doors that convinced a federal prosecutor to give one of the most generous plea deals in modern legal history to an alleged serial child molester. Follow-up reporting by the Miami Herald would reveal extensive communication between Epstein's lawyers and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Communication that showed Acosta personally involved in crafting the deal. Communication that demonstrated a level of deference rarely shown to defendants in criminal cases. The secrecy was equally troubling. Federal law requires prosecutors to notify victims about plea agreements. Acosta's office deliberately hid the deal from victims and their lawyers. They scheduled the plea hearing without notice. They sealed documents. When victims found out weeks later, they were devastated. Some had been preparing to testify. Some had been promised that Epstein would face serious consequences. Instead, they learned he would serve barely a year in a private cell with work release privileges that allowed him to spend most of his time at his office. The betrayal was complete. Epstein served his time under work release, meaning he was allowed to leave the jail 6 days a week for up to 12 hours a day to work at his office. His cell was more like a private suite. When he was released in 2009, he simply resumed his life. The private jets kept flying, the powerful connections remained intact. And the questions multiplied. Who were the co-conspirators protected by that immunity agreement? The names that would later emerge were stunning. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, was photographed with his arm around Virginia Giuffre, then 17, at the London home of Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate. Former President Bill Clinton flew on Epstein's jet multiple times, though he denied knowing anything about Epstein's crimes. Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz, who helped negotiate Epstein's plea deal, was later accused by victims of participating in abuse, accusations he vehemently denied and fought in court. Hedge fund manager Glenn Dubin and his wife were named in court documents. Les Wexner claimed he severed ties with Epstein after learning of the plea deal, but questions remained about how much he knew and when. But the most enigmatic figure in the entire network was Ghislaine Maxwell. Daughter of disgraced British media mogul Robert Maxwell, she was described by victims as Epstein's chief recruiter, his closest confidant, perhaps even his handler. She was sophisticated, connected. European royalty whispered her name at parties. She introduced Epstein to Prince Andrew. She was photographed at Chelsea Clinton's wedding. She had an uncanny ability to move between worlds, from academic conferences to exclusive clubs, from royal palaces to scientific symposiums. Victims described her as the friendly face who made them feel safe, only to allegedly facilitate their abuse. Maxwell's background made her the perfect partner for Epstein's operation. Born in France, raised in Britain, educated at Oxford, she had the pedigree and social connections Epstein lacked. When her father died mysteriously in 1991, falling from his yacht off the Canary Islands in what was ruled an accident but fueled conspiracy theories for decades, Maxwell was left adrift. She moved to New York and soon became involved with Epstein. Some described them as romantic partners. Others said it was purely professional. But whatever their personal relationship, their professional partnership was devastatingly effective. Victims described Maxwell's methods with chilling consistency. She would approach young girls at public places, beaches, shopping centers. She was warm, friendly, maternal even. She spoke with a crisp British accent that conveyed education and respectability. She offered opportunities, promised mentorship, talked about helping girls from difficult backgrounds. She was, as one victim described, the perfect predator's wing woman. Where Epstein might have seemed creepy or threatening, Maxwell seemed safe. She was a woman. She was sophisticated. She promised to help. And then she would deliver these girls directly to Epstein. The scope of Maxwell's alleged involvement went far beyond recruitment. Victims described her participating in abuse, directing other girls how to please Epstein, berating them when they resisted. They described her as enforcer and educator, teaching a curriculum of exploitation. Some said she was present during assaults. Others said she instructed them on how to recruit their friends. The picture that emerged from testimony was of someone not merely complicit but essential, not just enabling but orchestrating. Yet for years, Maxwell moved freely in elite circles. She attended prestigious events. She was a fixture at Epstein's gatherings, introducing scientists to billionaires, politicians to academics. She photographed herself with presidents, prime ministers, celebrities. When Epstein was arrested in 2008, Maxwell distanced herself publicly but apparently continued their association privately. Flight logs showed her traveling on his jet even after his conviction. She maintained properties in London, New York, Paris. She seemed untouchable, protected by the same social networks that had protected Epstein. The black book that would later be leaked contained more than 1,000 names. Not everyone in it was complicit, but the sheer breadth was astounding. Politicians from both parties, foreign dignitaries, titans of industry, scientists, and academics. The book wasn't evidence of wrongdoing, but it was evidence of access. Epstein had somehow positioned himself at the center of global power networks. How does a convicted sex offender maintain such connections? After his 2008 conviction, Epstein donated money to Harvard, MIT, and other prestigious institutions. He hosted scientific conferences at his Manhattan mansion, bringing together Nobel laureates and cutting-edge researchers. He presented himself as a philanthropist interested in science and education. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. Universities accepted his money while his name remained on the sex offender registry. The question that investigators would later pursue was whether this was reputation laundering or whether it served a more sinister purpose. Then in 2019, an investigative report by the Miami Herald changed everything. Reporter Julie K. Brown tracked down dozens of victims and detailed the failures of the 2008 prosecution. The public outrage was immediate. Federal prosecutors in New York, led by the Southern District of New York, reopened the investigation. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey after returning from Paris on his private jet. The indictment charged him with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. He was denied bail and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. Inside his Manhattan mansion, FBI agents found a trove of evidence: photographs of nude underage girls, a fake passport with Epstein's photo but a different name, listing his residence as Saudi Arabia, diamonds and cash. But most importantly, they found computers and hard drives that potentially contained communications, financial records, and perhaps most critically, evidence of who else was involved. Epstein's legal team immediately began working on another deal. High-powered attorneys, including former Judge Alan Dershowitz, argued that the 2008 non-prosecution agreement should protect him from new federal charges. The argument was legally creative but faced skepticism from prosecutors who noted that the agreement was with a different jurisdiction. Meanwhile, victims began speaking publicly. Virginia Giuffre, who had first come forward years earlier, detailed alleged abuse and trafficking to Prince Andrew and others. More women stepped forward. The magnitude of the alleged crimes became clearer. But Epstein would never stand trial. On August 10, 2019, guards found him unresponsive in his cell. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner ruled it suicide by hanging. But the circumstances immediately sparked conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Epstein was on suicide watch but had been removed from it days earlier. The guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes had fallen asleep and falsified records. The cameras outside his cell malfunctioned. An autopsy found injuries more consistent with strangulation than hanging, according to a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, though the official ruling stood. The timing seemed impossibly convenient for those whose names appeared in documents and testimonies. Internet forums exploded with theories. Had Epstein been murdered to protect powerful people? Was it intelligence-related, given persistent but unproven rumors about Epstein's connections to intelligence agencies? Or was it simply a catastrophic failure of the prison system allowing a high-profile inmate to take his own life? The Attorney General at the time, William Barr, whose father had once hired Epstein, called the circumstances perfect storm of screw-ups. The FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General launched investigations into the death. With Epstein dead, attention turned to Ghislaine Maxwell. She had disappeared from public view after his arrest, but the FBI finally located and arrested her in July 2020 at a secluded property in New Hampshire. She was charged with conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, enticement of a minor, conspiracy to transport minors with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and perjury. Her trial in late 2021 became one of the most closely watched in recent history. 4 women testified against Maxwell, describing how she allegedly recruited them, normalized abuse, and facilitated their exploitation by Epstein. They described her as charming at first, then manipulative, then threatening. The prosecution presented evidence of Maxwell's intimate involvement in every aspect of Epstein's operation. The defense argued she was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes, that she was another victim of his manipulation. On December 29, 2021, the jury found her guilty on 5 of 6 counts. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. But conviction of the 2 main figures left the larger questions unanswered. The flight logs from Epstein's jets showed trips to the island, to New Mexico, to Paris, with passengers whose names were redacted in public filings but leaked in various forms online. Prince Andrew settled a civil lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre in 2022, denying all allegations but agreeing to pay an undisclosed sum and make a substantial donation to her charity. He was stripped of his military titles and royal patronages. Former President Clinton's spokesperson maintained he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes and took only a few trips on the plane for legitimate humanitarian work. Others named in documents hired crisis PR firms and defamation lawyers. The broader question was systemic. How did Epstein's 2008 plea deal happen? In 2019, Alexander Acosta resigned as Secretary of Labor under pressure about his handling of the case. Documents revealed that Acosta had been told Epstein belonged to intelligence, though no evidence ever publicly substantiated this claim. Records showed that Epstein had received extraordinarily preferential treatment during his incarceration, and that federal prosecutors had actively concealed the plea deal from victims. A federal judge later ruled the non-prosecution agreement violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act, but by then, Epstein was dead. The question of Epstein's wealth remained murky. Financial records showed wire transfers of millions of dollars between Epstein and Wexner, but the exact nature of the relationship was never fully explained. Wexner claimed he cut ties in 2007 and that Epstein had misappropriated vast sums of his money. Tax returns showed Epstein's charity donated millions to scientific research, but the source of those millions was unclear. Banking records revealed suspicious transactions that should have triggered money laundering reviews but apparently did not. The Virgin Islands, where his island was located, sued Epstein's estate for facilitating sex trafficking, and the case uncovered evidence that he had moved young women through the territory without detection for years. Perhaps most chilling were the sealed documents. Court filings from civil cases brought by victims were heavily redacted. Names were blacked out. Details were removed. In 2023 and 2024, as various legal battles over privacy and defamation played out, some documents were unsealed. Each new release brought a frenzy of media coverage and social media speculation. Some names were expected, others were surprises. But many documents remained sealed, protected by court orders, privacy laws, or ongoing investigations. The victims, now grown women, continue to speak out. Some have formed advocacy groups, others have written memoirs. They describe lives derailed by trauma, years of therapy, struggles with trust and intimacy. They express frustration that so many powerful people who allegedly participated or enabled the abuse have faced no consequences. The Victims' Compensation Fund, established after Epstein's death and funded by his estate, has paid out millions to more than 150 women. But monetary compensation cannot undo the harm. And still, questions linger. The FBI has never publicly stated whether any investigation into Epstein's associates is ongoing. The hard drives and computers seized from his properties have never been fully detailed in public. The intelligence community has never confirmed or denied any relationship with Epstein. The extent of the blackmail material Epstein allegedly possessed, if it existed, remains unknown. Witnesses who might have testified are gone, either through Epstein's death or settlements with non-disclosure agreements. The island sits empty now, a bizarre monument to what transpired there. Aerial photographs show the strange blue and white striped temple structure, the compound, the beaches. The Virgin Islands eventually seized it as part of their lawsuit. There is talk of selling it, of tearing down the buildings, of turning it into something productive. But for now, it remains frozen in time, a physical reminder of crimes committed in paradise. What the Epstein scandal revealed was not just individual depravity, but systemic failure. Failure of law enforcement to act on early warnings. Failure of the justice system to treat the powerful the same as the powerless. Failure of institutions that accepted his money without asking questions. Failure of social networks that gave him access and respectability. And perhaps most disturbingly, the failure of anyone in his orbit to stop what was happening, despite what many must have suspected or known. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became a meme, a shorthand for distrust of official narratives. But beneath the conspiracy theories lies a more uncomfortable truth. Whether Epstein killed himself or not, the system that enabled him for decades, that gave him a sweetheart deal in 2008, that allowed him to continue traveling the world and associating with the elite even as a registered sex offender, that system failed, and many of the people who were part of that system remain in positions of power and influence. The Black Book, now public in various leaked forms, serves as a directory of a certain stratum of global power. Not everyone in it was complicit, but everyone in it had access to Epstein. And Epstein's access to them provided cover, legitimacy, and opportunity. The question that victims and investigators continue to ask is simple. Who else knew, and what are they still hiding? In 2024, years after Epstein's death, the story continues to evolve. New documents surface, new witnesses come forward, legal battles continue over records that remain sealed. The full scope of what happened, who was involved, and how it was allowed to continue for so long may never be fully known. But what is known is enough to understand that this was not the story of one man's depravity. It was the story of a system that looked the other way, of powerful people who benefited from association, and of institutions that failed to protect the most vulnerable. The victims deserve truth. They deserve accountability. They deserve to know that the system that failed them has changed. But as long as documents remain sealed, as long as powerful people escape scrutiny, as long as the full truth remains hidden in redacted files and sealed court records, those demands for justice remain unfulfilled. And the questions that began with a black book full of names continue to haunt the corridors of power around the world. What really happened on that island? Who else was involved? How deep did the network go? What information is still being hidden and why? These questions don't have satisfying answers yet. Perhaps they never will. But the very existence of those questions, the gap between what is known and what is suspected, represents one of the most significant failures of justice in modern history. And until that gap closes, the scandal that shook the world will continue to reverberate through the institutions that enabled it.